I believe I'm live. I think I'm live. Hello, good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, or good whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. Welcome to Republic News. I'm your hostess, Liviana. This is my 7th Post-Saint show, and the title of the show is Operation The Enterprise. As usual, on these shows, I will be covering some recent and sometimes not so recent news. And to start off, I would like to go back into the past, quite some distance. However, this article was published just a few days ago, on the 13th of February. And this comes from New York Magazine's Intelligencer, and it was published, as I said, on the 13th of February, 2019. It is by Sarah Jones. The title of the article is Area Criminal Shocked by Congresswoman Who Cites His Crimes Out Loud. America loves a feel-good story. How else to explain our government's appetite for redemption arcs? Elliot Abrams was once convicted of lying to Congress, and on Wednesday he got to testify before Congress again, this time in his capacity as our special envoy to Venezuela. But not everyone was happy to see him. Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota, questioned the former Assistant Secretary of State about his old misdeeds. Omar began, quote, In 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush, end quote. Before she went on to ask him why the committee should believe anything he had to say. A spluttering Abrams complained that Omar did not give him a chance to respond, but the Congresswoman continued, quote, You dismissed as communist propaganda reports about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S.-trained troops. You later said the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement? End quote. Abrams responded, quote, From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement, end quote. But Omar, as the Daily Beast reported on Wednesday, was not moved by Abrams' answers. Yes or, quote, yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement? That happened under our watch, end quote. Abrams told the Congresswoman that her question was, quote, ridiculous, end quote, and that he, quote, would not respond to it, end quote. Omar is right, of course. In 1993, a lengthy New York Times report detailed the dedication with which members of the Reagan administration defended their material support for El Salvador's military, even though they knew some atrocity had occurred. The U.S. government's role in the steady destabilization of El Salvador is not only directly pertinent to the question of Abrams' suitability for his role, it is the subtext to a familiar piece of agitprop. Trump loves to stoke fear about immigrants, including many Salvadorans who came across the southern border. Not only are the vast majority peaceful, they're fleeing a violent political climate that we helped create. If Abrams is an expert in anything, in fact, it is destabilization. He later became a national security advisor to George W. Bush and is considered by many to be one of the principal architects of the invasion of Iraq. His appointment as envoy to Venezuela has been interpreted by commentators, especially on the left, as a sign that the Trump administration intends regime change in the country, a conclusion borne out by the administration's decision to christen Juan Guaido as the rightful president, even though Venezuelan voters did not elect him to that position, even though he didn't even run in the election, even though his party boycotted the election, even though they were allowed, along with many other opposition parties, to run in the election. No, they decided on their own to boycott the election and not run for office. but somehow he's the rightful, legitimate president of Venezuela. No, I don't think that's how that works, Mike Pence. Back to the article. In short, Abrams is a convicted liar with blood on his hands, and Omar's questions are a light penalty for his obscenities. Nevertheless, she has her detractors. But if commentators like Max Boot, appear unusually cynical in their defense of Abrams, consider that Henry Kissinger will probably die without ever visiting The Hague. The Trump administration did not introduce impunity to Washington. Washington is saturated with impunity right down to the bedrock underneath its swamp, and its nature has long benefited Abrams, a free man who, until he went to work for Trump, enjoyed a role as a senior fellow at the Council for Foreign Relations. Omar's questions were not disproportionately hostile. They're simply unusual. Abrams is the only kind of convict that Washington tends to tolerate. And that is the end of the article. I will, of course, provide a link to it. There may be some additional imagery or tweets that have been screen capped and so forth that I didn't read that you might like to have a look at later. As is my custom, I will either have the references to these articles, the links to these articles, in the video description, hopefully before the end of the show, or I will put them in a blog post if the size of my video description is too large for YouTube to handle. And then I will put a link to the blog post in the video description. Alright then, so let me move on to my next article here. I usually do not read all of these articles. The next one I may read in some detail. This one comes from Jacobin magazine. It's called The War on AMLO. It's by Kurt Hackbarth and Colin Moores. The Mexican and international right are united in their efforts to delegitimize the AMLO presidency. 10 weeks into the... Oh, I don't see a date on this. I printed it on the 22nd, so that could mean anything. I mean, that was earlier today. But I don't see a date anywhere on it, so I'm not sure when it was published. But it's relatively recent anyway. 10 weeks into the administration of Progressive President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO, the Mexican right has made it clear how it plans to oppose him, not as an adversary to be defeated, but as an enemy to be destroyed. And in a war of this kind, as the Spanish saying goes, todo vale, anything goes. The first of the false furors flared up even before AMLO took office, when former presidents Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón, both from the Conservative National Action Party, or PAN, criticized his decision to invite Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro to his inauguration, setting off a tempest in a teapot firestorm within the nation's corporate media. Inviting foreign heads of state to an inauguration, of course, is part and parcel of diplomatic protocol, something both Fox and Calderón had adhered to when inviting then-President Hugo Chavez to their respective ceremonies. But hypocrisy was no object when it came to the PAN's attempts to tie AMLO to the Bolivarian Revolution, an obsession that dated to the party's shadowy attack ads in the 2006 election and repeated faithfully through last year's campaign. When, during his inaugural speech in Congress, AMLO read out Maduro's name among a list of the foreign leaders in attendance, deputies from the PAN leapt up on cue and, with cries of "Dictador," ran to the front of the chamber to unfurl a banner condemning the Venezuelan head of state, a stunt strangely not repeated for the president of Cuba, Miguel Díaz-Canel. AMLO's first major initiative as president was to reduce the bloated salaries of the top federal bureaucracy, fulfilling a key campaign pledge, the maximum salaries law. In fact, was the first to be passed by the Morena congressional majority when it took office in September of 2018. But opposition parties quickly challenged the law's constitutionality, arguing that it violated the separation of powers. It was a strange argument to make, especially in light of the fact that Article 127 of the Mexican Constitution expressly stipulates that no public servant can earn more than the president. The law, in fact, was designed to enshrine the constitutional provision in secondary legislation. No matter the leader of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, in the Senate, Osorio Chong, fustigated against, quote, a climate of lynching, end quote, against the judicial branch, quote, propitiated by the government and its party, end quote, going so far as to claim that the measure would encourage not only the removal of judges and magistrates, but aggression against them. The judges themselves then got into the swing of things, beating their breasts in a public display of inconformity that led some observers to wonder why they hadn't bothered to protest in the same way the abuses of power, disappearances, and violence that led to some 267,000 homicides over the last two administrations. The attempt to portray the judiciary as the victims was audacious, to say the least. Federal judges are among the highest paid members of the federal bureaucracy, with the 11 members of the Supreme Court, which proceeded to place a temporary stay on the maximum salaries law, earning upwards of 600,000 pesos, the equivalent of 31,470 United States dollars per month, including benefits several times more than the president and more than the average Mexican makes in 8 years. The justices have since agreed to reduce their base salary by 25% for 2019. Oh my, how generous. Oh my. Anyway, so this article goes on for another, I don't know, 2-3 pages maybe 4. It's quite an interesting article, and maybe 5 pages. Geez, I don't know. 5 more pages. It's quite an interesting article. I highly recommend that you check it out and read it for yourselves. See what's going on down in our southern neighbor. And I'm going to move on to the next article. I often do talk about election news up front before I go into other stuff. So my next article is actually going back in time a bit as well, but again, this is an article that was just published this month, and it is, let's see, this comes from Disobedient Media. It was published on the 16th of February. It is by Adam Carter. It is called FAT Anomalies in Leaked DNC Emails Suggest Use of Thumb Drive. So all this stuff about hacking again. Yep. Okay, so the article says, recently I tweeted about several different batches of emails that made up the DNC emails collection initially published by WikiLeaks on July 22, 2016. In that tweet, I included the following table, and then he gives a table here that has DNC leaks and Podesta leaks with count, minutes, time, max time, minimum time, maximum time, FAT, minimum ID, maximum ID. The table outlines the last modification dates on the emails, batched by date, and shows the earliest and latest timestamps, minimum ID, maximum ID, count, and a column titled FAT. What the table illustrates is that the first batches of DNC emails published by WikiLeaks have times that include the files were transferred to a FAT file system likely transferred via a USB storage device. Having received several queries concerning this, I wanted to give a more detailed explanation, and as further observations have been made, to report on these and make some clarifications. The FAT column is in reference to the FAT file system, a file system that in recent years is usually used on USB storage devices. Some outdated non-USB disk storage devices used this in the past too, but it's very rare to find such devices still in use. One of the shortfalls of the FAT file system is that it stores timestamped data at a lower resolution to the nearest 2 seconds. However, this is advantageous for the purpose of digital forensics, as it means there is a pattern that can be detected and used to determine whether files were likely to have been transferred via a FAT file system. The batches of DNC emails that were determined to have been copied to a FAT file system due to this pattern have an X in the FAT column in the table referenced at the beginning of this article. I'm going to look at it again, and it shows of the DNC leaks that he has given in the table, there are 4. 3 of them have an X in the FAT column. None of them in the Podesta emails, and there are only 2 given there, have an FAT column, an X in the FAT column. He continues, drawing upon a 30-day email retention policy and the sent dates of emails, research in the public domain has suggested that the DNC emails were likely acquired on dates between May 19th and May the 25th, 2016, for some time. Looking at the sent dates of emails and the last modified dates of the email files in the first 2 batches, those with last modification dates in May, 2 months prior to initial publication, it is possible to determine that emails appear to have been copied on May the 23rd, 2016 and May the 25th, 2016. Emails were stored on a device using the FAT file system, very likely to be a USB storage device, at some point in time between acquisition and being published by WikiLeaks. We can't, however, make any declaration on exactly when the files were moved to a USB device, as different types of copy operations could produce the same result, even if the files were transferred to USB weeks after acquisition, as it's possible to retain the last modified dates in various circumstances. Interestingly, the FAT file system indication is in line with claims made by Craig Murray that were published in December 2018 in relation to how WikiLeaks had obtained the DNC leaks through a physical handover of the emails. This particular characteristic was also reported on recently, February 13th, 2019, in an article authored by William Binney and Larry Johnson titled, "Why the DNC Was Not Hacked by the Russians." In the article, they state, quote, "This data alone does not prove that the emails were copied at the DNC headquarters, but it does show that the data emails posted by WikiLeaks did go through a storage device like a thumb drive before WikiLeaks posted the emails on the World Wide Web. This fact alone is enough to raise reasonable doubts about Mueller's indictment accusing 12 Russian soldiers as the culprit for the leak of the DNC emails to WikiLeaks. A savvy defense attorney will argue, and rightly so, that someone copied the DNC files to a storage device, e.g. USB thumb drive, and transferred that to WikiLeaks." End quote. The article also covers conflicts between intelligence community assessments and Mueller's July 2018 indictment. Looking at the transfer speeds on these batches also gives us reason to doubt that this was a local machine or local network transfer straight to a USB device, as the transfers appear to have been at a rate of about 3 megabits per second. And there is a table, a chart given here. This suggests, let's see, it says May 23rd and May 25th copies are at approximately 3 megabits per second, or roughly the upload speed of a moderately fast retail internet connection. This suggests that the files published by WikiLeaks may initially have been transferred remotely. Some will argue that this supports assertions regarding the DNC being hacked. However, the rates observed alone could just as easily be argued to support statements made by Seymour Hersh that were reported in July and August of 2017, which suggest that WikiLeaks obtained access to a password-protected Dropbox where the files, DNC and Podesta emails, had been placed. Later batches, as well as the batches of emails with last modified dates before the initial publication of DNC leaks on July 22, 2016. There were 2 further batches of DNC emails that were made available on WikiLeaks' site at later dates and that had last modified timestamps in August and September 2016. The third batch with last modified dates of August 26, 2016 also appears to have been transferred via a USB storage device between acquisition and publication. The fourth of these, with last modified dates of September 21, 2016, did not have a FAT file system indication. While the new trenches included additional DNC staffers, WikiLeaks did not update their webpage to reflect that additions were made. However, publication of the batch with the last modified date of September 21, 2016 was announced via the WikiLeaks Twitter account on November 6, 2016, or November 7th on my side of the Atlantic. So then there's a tweet from the WikiLeaks Twitter account shown. Goes on, there's another table here that says some emails had internal send times that were later than the last modified timestamps by up to as much as 7 hours in some cases. Some files copied on May 23rd and May 25th have sent times that are larger than their file last modified times. The difference in hours is shown. This list is sorted by the time differences. We see that as the time difference increases, there is a general trend for the sent time to increase, but not in strict order. All times are normalized to Greenwich Mean Time. The IDs assigned to the different batches of files aren't in a consistent sequence, and it seems possible that the files were renamed after acquisition. The May 23rd batch, however, did use a subset of IDs used by the May 25th batch. And there's some more imagery. There are some bullet points, and let's see, what else do we have here? There's a screen cap of search results from the WikiLeaks website. Talks about data and verification. There's some more stuff here. I'm gonna, like I said, provide you a link so you can check this out for yourselves. You don't want to go through all the technical details, but the point being, there is considerable doubt cast by this evidence on the assertion that the DNC was hacked. So let's see. Let's go on. Now we're going to come up into a more recent history. This article is, of course, a very recent article. This was published. Well, it says. Oh, it was published on the 22nd, so it was published early today. Well, okay, it says 4 hours ago, and I printed it at 1:46 in the morning, so it was probably published yesterday late. But anyway, it's from AP, and it says, or it's actually from MSN, and it came to MSN from AP, from the Associated Press. I don't see an author's name, so I mean, AP doesn't often include authors in my experience. I could be wrong about that, but in my experience. Anyway, the article says the latest GOP candidate says new election should be called. Now, there was a video about this. I believe it was done by, let me see, who did that video? I think it might have been, oh, I'm going to include a link to that video as well, if I can find it here. I'm not sure where the heck it is. It should be here somewhere, though. I will look for it later and see if I can get that into the video description or the blog post for you to check out. Let's see. I want to say it might have been Tim Black, or it might have been Lee Camp. I can't remember now. But let's see here. Yeah, I'm not seeing it here. It was very recent. Oh, wait, yeah, it was from Redacted Tonight, so it was a Lee Camp video. Lee Camp, a video called "Election Fraud Proven in Court." So I'm gonna go ahead and copy. Oh shit! I'm gonna go ahead and copy that link and put it into my notes here so that I can provide it for you later on. Yeah. Let's see, let's put it right. So you can check this out later on as well. And the article then says, breaking, North Carolina orders new election in undecided U.S. House race after hearing evidence it was tainted by ballot fraud. Earlier, Raleigh, North Carolina, the latest on a hearing outlining a ballot fraud investigation in an undeclared North Carolina congressional race for which a winner hasn't been finalized. So when I printed this out very early this morning, about 1 something in the morning, the article had been updated to say that North Carolina had ordered the new election, but the original article was saying that the Republican in the country's last undecided congressional race is ending his bid to be declared a winner and calling for a new election. Mark Harris told the state's elections board on Thursday that he was ending his fight to be declared the winner in the 9th Congressional District. Harris said he was still struggling from health problems caused by a blood infection that landed him in a hospital and led to 2 strokes. Harris said he was suffering from confusion, but that he could see there were substantial doubts about fairness and that a new election is necessary. Harris made the surprising reversal after his lawyers argued in recent legal filings to the board that he should be certified the winner. Harris held a slim lead over Democrat Dan McCready after the election in November, but the state refused to certify the election as allegations of ballot fraud began to surface. And earlier than that, yesterday at 12 p.m., I'm assuming these times are Eastern, since North Carolina is in the Eastern time zone. The Republican claiming victory in the country's last undecided congressional election says he believed the word of a local political operative that his incredible vote-collecting results were legal despite multiple warnings from the candidate's son. Mark Harris said Thursday he never independently confirmed claims by Leslie McCrae Dallas and Bladen County officials who'd used his services that Dallas workers never touched ballots. Harris told a special state elections board hearing that he took Dallas's word despite data his son provided showing that probably wasn't true. Harris says he also never checked how consultants were managing and paying Dallas. Harris said he was shocked to learn his campaign paid Dallas about $115,000 without requiring expense receipts or proof that work was performed. The article goes on, and as it goes on, it goes further back in time to report earlier information. So, I mean, I've given you the latest bits of information here. It's quite interesting. And good on Harris for, backing down and actually calling for a new election. And good on the state of North Carolina for ordering a new election. It's rather surprising. And I don't think you'd get that from certain people. No names will be named here. Hillary Clinton. Anyway, there is also a Rolling Stone Politics 2020 Democratic Primary Leaderboard. Now, when I printed this out a few days ago, let's see, I think I printed it out on the, I printed it out on the 18th, and at the time that I printed it out, it had Kamala Harris in first place, which I find rather doubtful. But it may have changed. They may have updated the article since then, since it's supposed to be a leaderboard. And then again, they may not have. I don't know. But I'm going to include a link to that as well, so you can go and check it out for yourselves, because I don't intend to read through all of that. That's a rather lengthy article. I'm not even going to look at any part of it for the show. The next thing that I want to get to is also about this coming election, just as the one I just mentioned. And this is some good news here. This is from WTNH. It was published on the 14th of February 2019, and it is picked up by Channel 8 WTNH from the Associated Press. The article title is State Approves First State Grant for a Green Party Candidate. Well, it says this material may not be published, broadcast, rewritten, or redistributed, so I'm not going to read it to you. But anyway, the point is that Connecticut Elections Commission, for the first time ever in the 12-year history of the Citizens Elections Program, has approved a state campaign grant for a Green Party candidate. That is the candidate Myrna Martinez, who is running for House of Representatives seat in New London, has qualified for $14,075 in funding. So that's some good news, and I will include a link to this so you can check it out for yourselves. Because, I mean, fair use is fair use, but I don't feel like going to court to fight them over it. So, let me have a look over here and see if anybody's out there talking. Hello, old gringo. Alright then. Alright. I will see you later then, or you can check out the video later, the show, after the fact. So I've got a few more articles here to look at. I was trying to get them into some semblance of order whenever I realized it was time to start. So I didn't quite get everything completed. I've been in meetings 3 nights this week, which kind of impeded my progress on getting everything ready. I also have another article that will be coming out in the near future, I hope, at realprogressivesusa.com. Or yeah, so keep an eye out for that. Now, those of you who are subscribers to the channel and watch faithfully, thank you, first of all. But second of all, you've probably already heard me do a video in which I said all of that. However, you know, if you would like to check it out, it will be available theoretically at realprogressivesusa.com in the near future. So let me see, what else do I have here to look at tonight? Okay, I think I might have, since we were talking about Elliot Abrams and things of that nature. Wait, just 1 minute. I might have something else here already arranged. No, I don't, unfortunately. So, there is something else I'd like to talk about, before I get on to that. This comes from, the New Republic, and it was published on, the 15th of February. It was by Ben Ehrenreich, and it's called "This is What the Beginning of a Real Israel Debate Looks Like." So this is a very interesting article. Let me just go ahead and put that into my notes so that I can add it to the video description or blog post or whatever. And let me see here. There should be a link for it here somewhere on the... Yeah, there is. Good. Alright, so I'm going to take that and paste that in there too. Copy that. And, okay, so it says... under the title, there's kind of a, you know, a teaser like there is sometimes for articles. It says, before Ilhan Omar came to the national stage, Stephen Walt and John Mearsheimer tried to discuss pro-Israel lobbying. They were shouted down. With all the shouting, it was easy to miss, but something new happened in Washington this week. If you can't see it yet, put yourself back in 2006, when everything about a Somali-American Muslim congresswoman tweeting a line from a Puff Daddy song, as Minnesota Representative Ilhan Omar did Sunday evening, would have been unthinkable. In March 2006, two established neo-realist foreign policy wonks named John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt published an article in the London Review of Books. They argued that outsized U.S. support for Israel, which receives more U.S. military aid than any other country on the planet, made little sense in a post-Cold War context in which Israel was no longer a, quote, vital strategic asset, end quote. Mearsheimer and Walt attributed the irrational persistence of this policy to highly effective lobbying efforts, quote, to steer U.S. foreign policy in a pro-Israel direction, end quote. The Israel lobby, as they called it, was not a cabal or a conspiracy, but something altogether ordinary in Washington, like the gun lobby or the steel lobby, a, quote, loose coalition of individuals and organizations, end quote, encompassing Christian evangelicals, neoconservatives, and the powerful America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, whose support or opposition could make or break a candidate. They wrote, quote, the bottom line is that AIPAC, or AIPAC, a de facto agent for a foreign government, has a stranglehold on Congress, with the result that U.S. policy towards Israel is not debated there, end quote. Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand why anyone would would question or debate that or try to shout it down. I think most citizens are, pretty well aware of that. I will point out, however, that the AIPAC group, when the article here describes some of the people who make it up, it refers to Christian evangelicals. Yes, but there are also Christian fundamentalists involved, and evangelical and fundamentalist are not synonyms, and they are not interchangeable terms. Doctrinally, evangelicals and fundamentalists are very similar, but they are not identical, even doctrinally, and as far as approach to how they relate to other people and what they want to do in terms of public policy and so forth, they have very, very different approaches. I mean, I can go into considerable detail about this because I was there at a Southern Baptist university in the 1980s when the fundamentalists took over the Southern Baptist Convention. I watched it happen. I know exactly what was happening. I know who the evangelicals were, who were in charge before. The people the fundamentalists were calling liberals. As if, right? Oh my God. No, they're not liberals. They are extremely conservative, just like fundamentalists, but they're not quite as batshit crazy as fundamentalists. I mean, they're kind of batty, but they're not quite that far gone. Anyway, back to the article. To almost anyone with experience in American electoral politics, Mearsheimer and Walt were stating the obvious. The near unanimity of politicians' support for Israel resulted not from inborn Zionist sympathies, but rather organizing and influence, which in Washington invariably involves money. The uproar was nonetheless fierce. Pundits lined up to get their kicks in. Jeffrey Goldberg, writing in The Atlantic, called the two authors, quote, neo-Lindberghians, end quote, and characterized Walt as a, quote, grubby Jew baiter, end quote, who, quote, makes his living scapegoating Jews, end quote. David Rothkopf in Foreign Policy was only slightly more generous, while Mearsheimer and Walt, quote, may not be anti-Semites themselves, end quote, he allowed, end quote, they made a cynical decision to cash in on anti-Semitism, end quote. Jonathan Chait went after them repeatedly in the pages of the New Republic, dismissing their views as, quote, simply kooky, end quote. This may have been at a time when the New Republic was going through its conservative phase. It did have a brief period of time when it was, oh wow, very, very untrue to the roots of its founding. The New Republic was founded in 1913 by historical progressives. So, I mean, but it has been through a number of changes in perspective since then. It is a magazine I generally support. I do have both a print and digital subscription to it, and it's a magazine that I generally agree with. Probably more than 50% of the articles that get published. I don't want to say anything more than that because I'm not sure. I haven't taken a tally. But anyway, yeah, they did go through a kind of right-wing and conservative phase. And there again, right-wing and conservative are not the same thing. They are two different dimensions, with right-wing pertaining to economic policy and conservative pertaining to attitudes towards change in society and or culture, whereas neoconservative has to do with foreign policy. Anyway, now if you've watched any of my stuff before, you've probably heard me say these things in much greater detail, but I'm trying to get away from being too redundant, since my boyfriend seems to get annoyed with me doing that. And by the time Ilhan Omar walked onto the national stage, a lot had changed, and not much at all. Since 2006, we've seen 3 devastating and overwhelmingly one-sided Israeli assaults on Gaza, the massive expansion of settlements in a brutal and seemingly endless occupation, the collapse of U.S.-sponsored peace negotiations, and anything that could be called an Israeli left, a widening gulf between Israeli and American Jews, and an Israeli prime minister who went out of his way to embarrass a popular Democratic president and to embrace the neo-fascist right. Ever larger cracks are appearing in the defensive wall the U.S. media has for years erected around Israel. Critical voices, even Palestinian ones, are increasingly making it into the op-ed pages. Space for debate is finally opening up, and the controversy that blew up around Omar is a foretaste of how bitterly that space will be contested. Now, I'm going to jump in here again and do some commentary. In the previous paragraph, when the author was referring to commentary from pundits back in 2006, like Jeffrey Goldberg and David Rothkopf and Jonathan Chait. I don't know when it became popular or acceptable to sort of confuse anti-Semitism with being opposed to Israeli militarism and the apartheid society they are apparently setting up, and their persecution of Palestinians, the violation of Palestinian human rights, and so forth. And I know there are going to be people out there that are going to howl and piss and moan about Hamas is a terrorist organization and blah, 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 blah. You know what? There's a logical fallacy, tu quoque. It means, literally in Latin, it means you also. When we talk about it in English logic classes, we sometimes refer to it as the fallacy of believing that two wrongs make a right. Hamas may or may not be a terrorist organization. Certainly there was terrorism in my youth from Palestinians with the Palestinian Liberation Organization and so forth. And there certainly may continue to be some sort of violent reaction to Israeli occupation. But even so, that does not justify Israeli human rights abuses towards Palestinians. As far as anti-Semitism, the first guy I ever loved was Jewish. I've rather recently, one of my more recent boyfriends was also Jewish. So, I mean, I don't have any kind of anti-Semitic perspective, but I don't approve of hyper-Zionism. Do I think Israel has a right to exist? Yeah, sure. But I don't think Israel has a right to claim every bit of territory there, push the Palestinians out, bulldoze their houses down, shoot them in the head, that kind of stuff. That's not. Well, the Nazis, yeah, okay, the Nazis were bad people. They were extremely bad people. They engaged in mass murder. All that stuff is true. That doesn't give the Israelis a license to, do the same things, basically. Now, I know they're not rounding up Palestinians and shipping them off to gas chambers and burning their bodies and stuff like that, but, they are engaging in what could be considered a form of genocide. They are erasing the culture, a cultural genocide. They are showing up and giving people a few hours to vacate their premises before the bulldozers come in and knock the houses down, taking more and more and more and more land, pushing the Palestinians into essentially what could be called reservations or ghettos, if you will. Shooting children, shooting reporters, shooting nurses. And I've heard all the excuses. Well, they use children as human shields. They plant explosives on nurses. Oh, come on, guys. Stop making excuses. There's no excuse for this shit. Benjamin Netanyahu is a butcher. And the United States should not be supporting his regime. And that's all I have to say about that. And this article goes on for another page and a half. 2 pages. Yeah, page and a half or so. Anyway, so I will include a link to that in the video description so you can check it out as you will, hopefully. And let's see, anybody out there talking? Nobody out there talking. I'm still here. Somebody's watching, apparently, and it is not me this time. Let's see. So what's the next article that I wanted to... oh yes, this one I think is a little bit older article, but it's also, I think, kind of timely, especially in light of the article I just read. This one comes from September of 2017. It was published in Truth Out, or I'm sorry, yeah, Truth Out, yeah. It's by Rich Whitney, published the 23rd of September 2017. And give me just a moment. I'm going to have a sip of this soda before I kind of coat my throat so that I don't lose my voice in the midst of the show. Goodness. Okay, so let me see here. Where is this? I'm going to have to find the link to this in a bit. Let's see. I might be able to find it right here. I hope I can find it. Yeah, there it is, right there. Alright, so all I have to do then is copy-paste that into my notes, and it'll be ready to add to the video description in a bit. Alright then, so I'm going to dive into this. The article is titled, U.S. provides military assistance to 73% of world's dictatorships. Now again, this is from September, late September of 2017. For decades, the American people have been repeatedly told by their government and corporate-run media that acts of war ordered by their president have been largely motivated by the need to counter acts of aggression or oppression by, quote, evil dictators, end quote. We were told that we had to invade Iraq because Saddam Hussein was an evil dictator. We had to bomb Libya because Muammar Gaddafi was an evil dictator bent on unleashing a bloodbath on his own people. Today, of course, we are told that we should support insurgents in Syria because Bashar al-Assad is an evil dictator, and we must repeatedly rattle our sabers at North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russia's Vladimir Putin because they, too, are evil dictators. This is part of the larger, usually unquestioned mainstream corporate media narrative that the U.S. leads the, quote, Western democracies, end quote, in a global struggle to combat terrorism and totalitarianism and promote democracy. I set out to answer a simple question. Is it true? Does the U.S. government actually oppose dictatorships and champion democracy around the world, as we are repeatedly told? The truth is not easy to find, but federal sources do provide an answer. No. According to Freedom House's rating system of political rights around the world, there were 49 nations in the world as of 2015 that can be fairly characterized as dictatorships. As of fiscal year 2015, the last year for which we have publicly available data, the federal government of the United States had been providing military assistance to 36 of them, courtesy of, oh wait, it says your tax dollars, but that's not really how it works. We'll excuse that for the moment, because you don't want to get me started on macroeconomics again. The United States currently supports over 73% of the world's dictatorships. Most politically aware people know of some of the more highly publicized instances of this, such as the tens of billions of dollars worth of U.S. military assistance provided to the beheading capital of the world, the misogynistic monarchy of Saudi Arabia, and the repressive military dictatorship now in power in Egypt. But apologists for our nation's imperialistic foreign policy may try to rationalize such support, arguing that Saudi Arabia and Egypt are exceptions to the rule. They may argue that our broader national interests in the Middle East require temporarily overlooking the oppressive nature of those particular states in order to serve a broader pro-democratic endgame. Such hogwash could be critiqued on many counts, of course, beginning with its class-biased presumptions about what constitutes U.S. national interests. But my survey of U.S. support for dictatorships around the world demonstrates that our government's support for Saudi Arabia and Egypt are not exceptions to the rule at all. They are the rule. It was not easy to find out how many of the world's dictatorships are being supported by the United States. No one else seems to be compiling or maintaining a list. So I had to go at it by myself. Here is how I came up with my answer. Step 1, determine how many of the world's governments may be fairly characterized as dictatorships. A commonly accepted definition of a dictatorship is a system of government in which one person or a small group possesses absolute state power, thereby directing all national policies and major acts, leaving the people powerless to alter those decisions or replace those in power by any method short of revolution or coup. I examined a number of websites and organizations that claimed to maintain lists of the world's dictatorships, but most of them were either dated, listed only the world's worst dictators, or had similar limitations, and or failed to describe their methodology. I ultimately was left with the annual Freedom in the World reports published by Freedom House as the best source for providing a comprehensive list. This was not entirely satisfactory, as Freedom House has a decidedly pro-S ruling class bias. For example, it categorizes Russia as a dictatorship. In the introduction to its 2017 Freedom in the World report, it opines that, quote, Russia, in stunning displays of hubris and hostility, interfered in the political processes of the United States and other democracies, escalated its military support for the Assad dictatorship in Syria, and solidified its illegal occupation of Ukrainian territory, end quote. A more objective view would note that claims of interference in the U.S. election by the Russian government have not been proven unless one is inclined to take certain U.S. intelligence agencies at their word. That Russia was asked by the UN-recognized Syrian government for assistance in compliance with international law, unlike U.S. acts of aggression and support for insurrection there, and would at least acknowledge that any Russian intervention in Ukraine occurred in the context of the United States' brazen support for a coup in that nation. Nonetheless, the Freedom House reports appear to be the best, if not the only, comprehensive gauge of political rights and freedoms covering every nation in the world. It utilizes a team of about 130 in-house and external analysts and expert advisors from the academic, think tank, and human rights communities who purportedly use a broad range of sources, including news articles, academic analyses, reports from non-governmental organizations, and individual professional contacts. The analysts' proposed scores are discussed and defended at annual review meetings organized by region and attended by Freedom House staff and a panel of expert advisors. The final scores represent the consensus of the analysts, advisors, and staff and are intended to be comparable from year to year and across countries and regions. Freedom House concedes that, quote, although an element of subjectivity is unavoidable in such an enterprise, the ratings process emphasizes methodological consistency, intellectual rigor, and balanced and unbiased judgments, end quote. One can remain skeptical, but a key consideration is that Freedom House's pronounced pro-U.S. bias is actually a plus for purposes of this project. If its team of experts tilt toward a pro-U.S. government perspective, this means that it would indulge every presumption in favor of not categorizing nations supported by the United States as dictatorships. In other words, if even Freedom House categorizes a government backed by the United States as a dictatorship, one can be fairly confident that its assessment in that instance is accurate. For purposes of the present assessment, I used Freedom House's 2016 Freedom in the World report. Even though its 2017 report is now available, I did so because the 2016 report reflects its assessment of political rights and civil liberties as they existed in 2015, which would roughly correspond with the military assistance and arms sales data that I had available for federal fiscal year 2015, which is October the 1st, 2014 to September the 30th, 2015, and calendar year 2015. Blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Freedom House uses a scoring system to gauge a nation's political rights and civil liberties in order to rate each country as free, partly free, or not free, with a range of scores for each category. It describes its scoring system as follows, quote, a country or territory is assigned 2 ratings, 7-1, one for political rights and one for civil liberties based on its total scores for the political rights and civil liberties questions, each rating of 1 through 7, with 1 representing the greatest degree of freedom and 7 the smallest degree of freedom, corresponds to a specific range of total scores, end quote. Anyway. I'm going to skip down a little bit here, and he says, by Freedom House's measure, then there were 49 nations, states that could be fairly characterized as dictatorships in 2015 as follows. And he gives a list, including Afghanistan, Algeria, Angola, Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Belarus, Brunei, Burundi, Cambodia, Cameroon, blah, 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 blah. Curiously, Venezuela is not on this list. That's interesting. It should be noted that Freedom House included in its ratings several other entities with a political rights score of 6 or 7 whose status as an independent state was itself disputed. Crimea, the Gaza Strip, Pakistani Kashmir, South Ossetia, Tibet, Transnistria, the West Bank, and Western Sahara. My count of 49 dictatorships in the world in 2015 excludes these subordinated or disputed state territories. Step 2. Determine which of the world's dictatorships received U.S.-funded military or weapons training, military arms financing, or authorized sales of military weapons from the United States in 2015. For this step, I relied on 4 sources. Blah, blah, blah. Number 1, Foreign Military Training in Fiscal Years 2015 and 2016, Volume 1 and Volume 2, Country Training Activities. From the United States Department of Defense and U.S. Department of State Joint Report to Congress. Oh, it is the, yeah, okay. The United States Department of Defense and Department of State Joint Report to Congress. Number 2, let's see how far I gotta scroll down here to get to that. U.S. Department of State Congressional Budget Justification Foreign Assistance Summary Tables, Fiscal Year 2017. Number 3, Department of Defense Security Cooperation Agency, or DSCA, Financial Policy and Analysis, Business Operations, Foreign Military Sales, Foreign Military Construction Sales, and Other Security Cooperation, Historical Facts as of September 30th, 2015. There are links to all of these, by the way, so when you get to this article, if you choose to look at it, and, you know, I mean, it belabors the point a bit and goes into some detail that, I mean, people accuse me of being too verbose and detailed at times, but this one is, I mean, I am looking at this going, good Lord, why in the, anyway. And number 4, Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI, transfer of major conventional weapons sorted by recipient, deals with deliveries or orders made for a year range 2015 to 2016. And let's see, blah, blah, blahs about that a little bit. Step 3, generate the chart. First column in the chart below lists the 49 countries classified by Freedom House as dictatorial in nature. The second column shows those nations that received some U.S. military training in fiscal year 2015, relying primarily on source 2, but also checking source 3. He's calling them source B and source C, I should say, but since he said he found 4 sources, I numbered them instead of giving you A, B, C, and D. The third column shows those nations that received an agreement for for future military sales or transfers from the United States in fiscal year 2015, with the dollar value of the military articles listed based on source C, but also checking source D. The fourth column shows those nations that received an actual delivery of military articles from the United States in fiscal year 2015, with the dollar value of the military articles listed based on source C, but also checking source D. So then he gives his table. And he's got, like he says in the first column, he's got nation run by dictatorship, Afghanistan, Algeria, Angola, blah, blah, blah. In the second column, he has received U.S. military training for fiscal year 2015. Yes, 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 yes. And the third column, military sales agreements, fiscal year 2015, 119 million, 125,000, 434,000, 5.5 million, 19.2 million, 230,000, and so forth. Military sales deliveries, fiscal year 2015, forms the fourth column. $83 million, $1.1 million, $1.617 million, $39.76 million, $107,000, $192,000, $1.18 million, and so forth. So, and this is a rather extensive, very, very interesting, yeah, chart. And he says at the end, I plan on providing similar reports on U.S. support for dictatorships around the world on an annual basis. I will begin work on a report covering fiscal year 2016 as soon as the relevant data becomes available. This is the most recent article I found by him on that, on the topic, but I didn't really look either, so this may have come out of my bookmarks from a couple of years ago or something. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not really sure how I found this. May have been given to me by someone else or the like. But anyway, so there's that. I may have to cut this short because my throat is beginning to give out on me. I do have some allergies occasionally, so let me just see. There are a few other things I did want to go over, though, tonight, because I had planned to talk about some of this last week, and I just didn't get to it. I tell you what, I'm going to give myself a little break here, and I'll be right back, so please bear with me. Let me just play some music for you while I'm AFK searching for a cough drop. And let's see here. Let's see, where is it? This should be it right here. Is this an MP4? I think it might be. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so this cough drop is helping a bit. Hopefully I will be able to go for a little bit longer. I generally don't go for longer than 2.5 hours, unless I have other people in here and we're discussing things. I would probably like to keep it to 2 hours in general, but that may not always be possible, depending on how many stories I have to go over and how much time it takes me to do so. At any rate, the next article I have for you comes from, I believe this comes from Truthdig. Not really sure where this comes from. Look. Yes, this is from Truthdig. And I don't see a date of publication on it, so I have no idea, but I printed it out sometime today, or sometime on the 22nd. I think it's after midnight here and on the East Coast now, so anyway, this is published by Aaron Glantz, and it's called The FBI's Dismantling Its War Crimes Unit. Since we have been talking about war criminals and dictatorships and so forth, it seems like it's on topic for tonight's show. The FBI is dismantling a special unit that investigates international war crimes and hunts down war criminals, including suspected torturers and perpetrators of genocide. Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting has learned. The unit, which was created a decade ago and has its roots in federal efforts to hunt Nazis living in the United States after World War II, has had a hand in many high-profile prosecutions. Most recently, its investigators helped take down the Liberian warlord Thomas Wowoju, whom agents found living a quiet life in Philadelphia. At trial, witnesses said Wowoju's men herded civilians through checkpoints decorated with severed heads and strings of human intestines. He was convicted of perjury in July. Now, human rights advocates worry that criminals like Wowoju could evade justice. Beth Van Schaak, a law professor at Stanford University, who was deputy ambassador at large for war crimes issues in the Obama administration, said, quote, "These are difficult cases to prove because they need rock-solid investigations," end quote. Scrapping the FBI unit, she said, quote, "is inevitably going to jeopardize prosecutions," end quote. In a statement, the FBI confirmed the shuttering of the War Crimes Unit, but argued its dissolution, quote, "in no way reflects a reduced commitment by the FBI," end quote. To enforce human rights law, the agents previously dedicated to human rights work will continue that work as members of the FBI's civil rights program, the agency said. But the move could run afoul of Congress, which mandated the unit's establishment and funds its work every year as part of the FBI's budget. Sources tell Reveal that most of the agents previously dedicated to human rights likely will now be assigned to other jobs, and worry that perpetrators of torture and genocide will be free to act with impunity. In addition to finding international war criminals living in the U.S., the FBI's Human Rights Unit also has investigated and apprehended perpetrators of war crimes against Americans abroad, along with Americans who commit war crimes themselves, such as military contractors accused of killing civilians in Iraq and Afghanistan, or U.S. citizens who fight alongside the Islamic State. All those efforts now could fall through the cracks. And so the article goes on for another page or so. Well, maybe another 3/4 of a page. Anyway, I will, of course, include the link to that for you later on as well. Let's see here. So, moving from government to corporate shenanigans, if you will. The next article comes from Common Dreams, and it is oh goodness, it was published on the 18th of February 2019. I'm not seeing an author's name, it just says Common Dreams. And there may be an author at the bottom. No idea, I don't see one. So, highly disturbing. Facebook blocks viral video outlets critical of U.S. foreign policy and corporate media. Mark. Journalists and advocates of press freedoms are once more directing outrage and criticism at Facebook for selectively censoring pages on its platform and refusing to explain the reason behind a decision that appears to many as a clear double standard applied to outlets critical of U.S. foreign policy and corporate interests. Facebook is under fire for shuttering 4 pages managed by the Berlin-based news and media company Mavic after CNN reporters asked the social media giant about Mavic, not disclosing that it is partly funded by the Russian government. CNN held its report titled, "Russia is backing a viral video company aimed at American millennials," until Friday, when Facebook blocked Soapbox, Waste Ed, Back Then, and In the Now. American Lebanese journalist Rania Khalek, a contributor to Soapbox and In the Now, who was interviewed by CNN, outlined the controversy in a lengthy, widely shared series of tweets. Monday morning, Khalek added an update to the Twitter thread. And this is a quote from her tweet. "It has been 3 days since at Facebook suspended at In the News tweets page at the behest of at CNN and U.S. government-funded think tanks. We had almost 4 million subscribers, did not violate any Facebook rules, were given no warning, and Facebook isn't responding to us," end quote. As CNN outlined in its report, which was updated and corrected on Monday, quote, "Company records for Mavic in Germany show that 51% of the company is owned by Ruptly, a subsidiary of RT, which is funded by the Russian government. The remaining 49% is controlled by former RT presenter Anissa Naoué, who is Mavic's CEO. The records were first reported by the German outlet T-Online and later by the Alliance for Securing Democracy, which brought it to CNN's attention. The Alliance for Securing Democracy is part of the German Marshall Fund, which receives funding from the U.S., German, and other governments. The Alliance for Securing Democracy says that while it is part of the German Marshall Fund, the ASD itself does not receive any funding from the German Marshall Fund and gets its money from private family funds and grants. but not from government funding, end quote. CNN also noted, quote, In the Now was originally a television show on RT, hosted by Naue. It has more than 3 million followers on Facebook, end quote. The other 3 pages, quote, have more than 30 million video views, though they've only been operating for a few months, end quote. What kind of content did they produce? Khalek offered a number of examples, including, and this is another one of her tweets from the 16th of February, quote, some more of in the Now tweets content that CNN finds threatening. Ask yourself, could I have produced this video at any other outlet besides maybe Al Jazeera? Why can't CNN engage with the content rather than getting Facebook to suppress this speech? End quote. And she gives a link to a video. In an interview with CNN, Mafic Chief Operating Officer J. Ray Sparks emphasized that Mafic is editorially independent from RT, which the U.S. government has forced to register as a foreign agent, and pointed out that it is, quote, standard industry practice, end quote, not to disclose ownership of a media producer on a Facebook page. However, as Kevin Gostola, I don't know, who co-hosts a podcast with Khalek, noted in an article published Saturday on Shadowproof, quote, although Khalek and Sparks detailed their editorial independence at Mafic extensively, CNN correspondent Drew Griffin remained incredulous at the reality that officials working at the Kremlin are not dictating what specific stories should be covered, end quote. And then there's a tweet from Kevin Gostola that says, quote, CNN reporter who worked on the story conceded in an interview on CNN, videos make a lot of legitimate arguments, and they weren't necessarily hiding their Russian ties. Didn't matter. CNN got Facebook to censor MediaOrg's pages. They manufactured news so they'd have a story, end quote. Let's see. Mafic said in a statement that charges the company was singled out for one reason and one reason only: the government that helps fund our company is Russia. Let's see. I'm not going to read the whole... No, anyway. I'm not going to read the whole article. But, yeah. I think probably some of my subscribers do follow Rania Khalek on Twitter, at least. So, you probably have seen some of her stuff. And it is a bit disturbing. I mean, we have German Marshall Fund is a somewhat notorious reputation for being sort of a neoconservative sort of think tank kind of thing. But yeah, I will include a link to this article here from Common Dreams as well in the eventual references that I will supply. I'm not going to go on too much longer because yeah, my throat, even with the cough drop, is beginning to crackle a bit too much. But there are, let's see, there's one other story that I want to talk about, and I've got, I think, 2, maybe 3 articles about it. And let me see where they're at. There are several other stories that I wanted to cover, but I guess I won't be able to tonight. We'll see if I can get back to them sometime this weekend, but no promises. So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about, or I'm sorry, the first article that I wanted to call to your attention is actually from Democracy Now! And it was published, let's see, well, the 15th of February. It's a very brief article, as I recall. Well, I don't know. It may be a little longer than I thought it was, but yeah, it's brief. I think it has a video included if you wanted to go and check it out. But it was published on the 15th of February 2019. It's from Democracy Now! Report, Amazon to pay no federal taxes despite making $11 billion in reported profits. A new study by the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy has found that Amazon will likely pay no federal taxes for a second year in a row, even though it reported over $11 billion in profit in 2018. Instead, the company will receive a $129 million federal income tax rebate. So for all you people pissing and moaning about Amazon HQ2 being canceled in New York, I just want to say, is this really the sort of company that you think is worthy of being given even more tax breaks by the state of New York? Really? I mean, they're getting, how much it is? What did it say? $129 million federal income tax rebate and paying no federal taxes for the second year in a row. But hell, let's just give them another tax break in New York and let them come in there and exploit the citizens of the state of New York too. I'm sorry, I have absolutely no sympathy. No sympathy for this at all. Not in the least. So, I'm not... There's plenty of stuff that has been said about what sort of jobs would be available if they did open this second headquarters in New York. And it's, you know, it's not exactly the... there's not exactly any agreement on let's see. There's not exactly any agreement on what sort of jobs would have been provided. Certainly, there are claims that these would have been jobs for people with skills, computer skills and the like, and that may be so, but they wouldn't all have been that. There were also some kind of grunt jobs, people that would have been put to work building the headquarters. Not exactly grunts, but you know, some of those would be skilled laborers as well, presumably masons and architects and the like, but also people who would be doing more manual labor type stuff. So trying to cast this as if it were some kind of loss of revenue for the people of New York, no. Actually, I notice now that there are actually two additional articles on this that I have here, and let's see here. One of them is going to be from, I think this one, I think I'll look at this one first. This is from the Watertown Daily News. Yeah, if I can, yeah, here we go. This was published on the 17th of February, 2019. Originally published in the New York Times, apparently. But this is from the Watertown Daily Times. And the article is called "Failed Amazon Deal Revives a Fight Over Growth." The political opposition that prompted Amazon to walk away from building a corporate headquarters in New York City featured a touchstone of the progressives' economic agenda, ending tax policies that unfairly reward and pamper the wealthy. I mean, come on, guys, this is exactly what it is. We're talking about neoliberalism, and we want it to end. Do you know what neoliberalism is? Do I have to explain it again? Neoliberalism is an economic system. It is a type of corporatism. Another type of corporatism is similar to it in many respects, and they are often confused. That type of corporatism is known as fascism. But neoliberalism has been the economic policy of every presidential administration and all of the Congresses since 1981, January, when Ronald Reagan moved into the White House. We have had 40 years of this shit. The difference between neoliberalism and fascism, the primary difference, is that both are types of corporatism, which means some union of or collusion between state and corporate power. But the difference is which of those two has the upper hand. In fascism, the state retains control, the corporate power is made to serve the interests of the state, yada, yada, yada. In neoliberalism, the state becomes the servant of corporate interests. And there's a little more detail to this, but if you want to know more, go back and watch some of my previous videos, because again, I've talked about this repeatedly, I've explained it repeatedly. I don't feel the need to have to continue to explain it every time I bring it up. The point is, one of the things that happens in neoliberalism is subsidies to industries, tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for corporations, giving the status of corporate personhood to corporations, extending constitutional rights to corporations, saying that money is speech and therefore you cannot prohibit corporations from giving money to candidates and campaigns and political parties. In other words, exactly what numerous American patriots over the past 200 plus years have warned against, including Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Henry Wallace, the list goes on and on. We cannot allow corporations and the wealthy to have undue influence on the apparatus of government, because if we do, we wind up with a neo-feudal kind of society, which is the end goal of neoliberalism. That's exactly what they would like to have. I wrote a kind of an analogy or a parable, metaphor, whatever you want to call it here. Yesterday, maybe? Let me see. When did I do this? Yeah, yesterday. It was on the 22nd, so. Picture this. A person crawling through the desert finds a cave with a crack in the ceiling. A single drop of water falls through the crack once a month. The person thinks to himself, if only there were more than a single drop, or if it fell more frequently than once a month, I might be able to save enough to fill my little thimble and better quench my thirst. Let's travel upwards through the crack. We find that the drop is actually coming from a leak in a pipe attached to a pump, which is pumping about 8 fluid ounce cup of water away from a person standing in an apartment in an arid environment, not quite desert, but close, and that cup full of water is coming from a 12 fluid ounce glass of water, itself being filled by a few drops of water falling every couple of weeks or so from a faucet. This person is thinking that if he or she could, if she could only afford a second glass, she might be able to save more water. The faucet comes from a pipe that goes up through the roof of her apartment, and comes from a pail in a modest business in a temperate environment to which is attached another pump, taking away about half the contents of the pail and pumping them upwards. A man standing in the business is watching a slow trickle of water falling into the pail, glaring at the pump, but more concerned about the pipe going down through the floor to the apartment below, thinking to himself how he should limit the flow of those few drops going into the apartment below so that he can have more water. The pail is being filled by a spigot from which a modest flow of water falls, the spigot bringing the water from a pipe coming down through the ceiling of the business. That pipe comes from a small pond just outside a large industrial park, where a group of factory owners are gathered around looking at the pipe leading away and downward from the pond, as well as another pump sending water upward through yet another pipe, trying to figure out how to limit the amount of water going in both directions. Meanwhile, they all have barrels full of water saved from the pond and no need to worry much about what they will drink. The pond itself is filled by a light shower of water sprinkling down through a gutter on the side of a penthouse. Moving up to the penthouse, we see a huge swimming pool with a small crack in the bottom, which is providing the water that goes into the gutter. Here there is no pump sending water upward, but rather a pump filling the swimming pool. The rather well-fed and overhydrated person standing next to the pool is very upset about the small crack in the bottom of the pool and determined to find some way to patch it completely. Meanwhile, the pipe which comes up from below continues upward. And of course, it's taking nothing from this penthouse pool. We follow this pipe and we come to a floor of government offices. Here we see the pipe which is sending the water upwards turned out into a vast open nothingness, spraying the water it has brought up from below out into non-existence. There is another pipe going downward, filling the swimming pool in the penthouse below, which pipe is attached to an almost limitless swimming pool. This pool is filled by water being created out of hydrogen and oxygen mixed together by a group of scientists. They are also sending tiny amounts of water all the way down to the desert area, which make very little difference since almost all of the water they are producing and allowing to leave their own vast pool is going into the swimming pool in the penthouse. And that is how trickle-down economics and taxation actually work at the federal level. Taxes go away into nothing. When the federal government taxes, it simply takes money out of circulation and, in essence, destroys it. The government produces money itself out of nothing. Keystrokes. It subsidizes the largest businesses and gives tax breaks to the wealthiest, while flinging drops of water further down, each lower level getting less and less of the drops, and the largest businesses are angry that they have to give a moderate bit of water to the smaller businesses, which are angry that they have to give a few drops of water to their employees, who are angry that the destitute are getting a drop of water a month. That is neoliberalism. That is the society we have. I'm old enough to remember a time in the late 60s and early 70s when one person could work 40 hours a week and provide for a spouse and anywhere from 1 to 4 children with relative ease. It was about the mid-70s when you started having people working, both parents working, trying to, get ahead. Eventually it got to the point where the cost of living was increasing significantly, but minimum wage and salaries paid to employees were not keeping pace with the increase in the cost of living, so that it got to the point where both parents actually had to work just to make ends meet. And now we're in a situation where both parents have to work 2 or 3 part-time jobs because full-time jobs just really aren't available because the corporations don't want to pay for their health care. And if they, allow them to have a full-time job, then they have to cover them. but also because they just don't want to give out the money. They want to cling and hoard as much as possible. That's the nature of the beast, which is corporatism and actually capitalism itself. So, these people that are working 2 or 3 part-time jobs are no longer just trying to make ends meet. They're often going into the hole, going into the red each month, more and more and more, and their debt rises and rises. And their debt is actually meaningful, unlike government debt, which is pro forma. It's simply done as a matter of form. All government debt is in the form of the government's own fiat currency, which is a sovereign, free-floating, non-convertible fiat currency. That debt can either be called nor force redeemed, and when it is redeemed, it is only redeemed in the form of that fiat currency. The government, therefore, cannot go broke or become insolvent in debts denominated in its own fiat currency. The only constraint on government spending at the federal level is resources. And if we get close to full employment, then we'll have to be concerned about inflation turning into hyperinflation. But we're nowhere near that at this point in time. But sure, let's let Amazon have yet another tax cut, shall we? No, let's not. So, yeah. I'm sorry, I wandered away from the article. The article continues. Oh, let me just read the first paragraph again, which is a single sentence. I do find paragraphs made of 1 or 2 sentences very annoying. This is a thing that got started in sometime in the mid-'80s, and at the time we all mocked this kind of practice, but somehow it has become par for the course. The political opposition that prompted Amazon to walk away from building a corporate headquarters in New York City featured a touchstone of the progressives' economic agenda, ending tax policies that unfairly reward and pamper the wealthy. Now, I saw some fool, and I don't remember who it was, some right-wing nut, recently talking about the concept of fairness that recently got started being taught in the schools sometime in the 80s or 90s. No, baby, fairness is inherent to the concept of justice, and that is an idea that has been going on for several thousand years, at least back into the time of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and so forth. That is what justice is. Justice must involve fairness. You don't have economic justice if you don't have economic fairness. This doesn't mean everybody has to be dragged down to the same lowest common denominator and all live in shit and mud. But it does mean that if there's anybody in this country who is working 40 hours a week and not able to make ends meet because they're not being paid enough to live on, then somebody like Jeff Bezos shouldn't be getting as much money as he's getting. Now, I get no problem with billionaires. You'll find a lot of socialists who will say, there shouldn't be any billionaires, there should be a maximum wage. Yeah, I'm not down with that. I'm sorry, I'm not. But, you know, at the same time, I do think there has to be some kind of leveling of the playing field. You can't have a person rolling in billions of dollars by fleecing his employees, by refusing to pay them a living wage. And a living wage is not $15 an hour. In most states, it would be $22 or more. In some states, it would be $30, $35 or more. You know, the cost of living differs from state to state. I'm sorry if this is news to somebody out there, but it is true. It will cost you a lot more money to live in California or Oregon or Washington than it will cost you to live in Oklahoma or Kansas or Missouri or Arkansas or Texas. It'll cost you more money to live in New York City or Boston than it will cost you to live in Tennessee or Kentucky. That's just the way it is, and I mean, I'm not really sure why. Certainly, the cost of living is different there, and there are a number of factors involved in that. Not least of which is the cost of rent. And there is another article that I would like to get to, but I probably won't tonight because we're getting close to being 2 hours already, that talks about how Oregon is probably going to become the first state to have statewide rent control. Anyway, I'm going to go back to this article. This also exposed a political vulnerability, leaving unclear what alternative strategy they are offering to encourage growth and create the thousands of jobs that Amazon promised to bring to the city. No, it doesn't, actually. We've talked about this repeatedly. I don't know why Patricia Cohen is unaware of this, but we've been talking about a Green New Deal, especially in the Green Party of the United States, for over 10 years. Global Greens have been talking about it since 2007. So the Green New Deal inherently involves a federal jobs guarantee. That is to put people to work to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, to help with the transition from fossil fuels and other non-renewable energy sources to renewable energy sources. And honestly, if we have sense enough to actually enact a Green New Deal, because we're going to have to. I mean, the oceans are going to turn acidic. The very planet itself is going to become hostile to most forms of life currently existing on the planet, including the species known as Homo sapiens sapiens. That is the human race. This is an extinction level event coming. We have 11, 12 years in which to ameliorate the worst effects of the impending climate catastrophe, which is, let's not even call it climate change anymore, as some recent articles were talking about. It's basically environmental collapse. And it is, in fact, man-made. So, I mean, all you people out there that are drinking the Kool-Aid that the petroleum industry is feeding you, maybe you want to listen to some other people like the 97% of climate scientists who are in agreement that this is happening and it is being caused by human activity. But if we do have sense enough to enact a Green New Deal, we're going to need pretty much full employment, or close to it. I mean, not everyone can work. There are, the elderly and the disabled and so forth who won't be able to work, and for them we would like to see a basic income, not universal basic income, which would be better than the shit that they're getting now from Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability, SSI, welfare, and whatnot. And certainly National Improved and Expanded Medicare for All, which is simply not socialized medicine, but rather nationalized healthcare insurance, something that is an idea over 100 years old, and the fucking corporate Democrats keep on pissing about, we'll do it incrementally. Look, guys, the idea is over 100 years old. How much more incremental do you want to do it? The only improvement, really, with Obamacare is that there are pre-existing conditions which are now covered. Oh, but there are all these many more people insured now. Yes, because their conditions are now covered, dumbass. Jesus Christ, I swear. You would think that people are incapable of any kind of critical thought whatsoever. Anyway, if we do have sense enough to enact a Green New Deal, we're going to have to put able-bodied Americans to work, and suddenly the idea of immigration as some sort of threat is not going to be regarded as anything other than stupid anymore, because we're going to need a lot more people, able-bodied people, to do this than we have in the United States today. We're going to need immigration. Anyway, this article, I don't know, we're going to have some stuff about let me say, the clash has consequences far beyond New York, going to the heart of a national debate that is likely to dominate the 2020 presidential race. What is the best way to spread prosperity? As Governor Andrew Cuomo fumed that some of his fellow Democrats put, quote, the state's economic future, end quote, at risk, others inside and outside the party saw the scuttled project as evidence that the left doesn't understand how to generate growth. In a tweet, Lloyd Blankfein, senior chairman of Goldman Sachs, lashed out at progressive Democrats, labeling them as both anti-progress and anti-democratic. Notice the word there, anti-democratic, has a capital D in democratic. In other words, it's a reference to the Democratic Party, not the concept of democracy. But, I mean, this is Lloyd Blankfein we're talking about here, the chairman of Goldman Sachs. I don't think he's really the person with his finger on the pulse of what the average American has to deal with. Those views feed into a powerful, long-held narrative popularized by Ronald Reagan that Democratic policymakers had, as then-Senator Barack Obama put in 2006, become, quote, more obsessed with slicing the economic pie than with growing the pie, end quote. For Republicans, Amazon's retreat is an opportunity to revive beloved barbs and brand Democrats as job killers who are all too eager to tax and spend. Again, taxation does not fund spending at the federal level. That's an economic fact. That is reality. That is the operational reality of our monetary system. The government creates money. You wouldn't have money to pay taxes with if the government hadn't spent it into existence in the first goddamn place. Lower taxes for investors and business owners, they argue, is what spurs entrepreneurs to create jobs and spread the wealth. Yeah, we've been trying this for 40 fucking years, and how has it worked? Not very fucking well. For progressives, defeating a plan that handed tax incentives to a trillion-dollar tech titan is part of a broader effort to discredit what they see as bankrupt economic policies. They argue that workers and the government, two players that have been relegated to the background, should be treated as important engines of growth. Yeah, because these wealthy motherfuckers get rich off of hard work. It's just not their own hard work. It's the hard work of the workers. It's the hard work of their employees. It's not their hard work. Will they work harder than anybody? No. Really? Really? I don't think you know too many people who work then. Jeez. What the fuck is wrong with people? Anyway, I'm not going to read all of this article. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it comes originally, apparently, from the New York Times, so it's probably going to be relatively pro-establishment. I don't know the author. I'm not familiar with her. So I don't know what kind of perspective she has, but it does come from the New York Times, which is one of the biggest establishment rags there is. So, yeah. Let me just see here if I can find the link to that article so I can put it into the description whenever the time comes. If I can get my fingers on the right keys. Yeah, there we go. Oh, it's not coming up. Maybe I misspelled it. No? And I have one other article I would like to look at here. About this, if I can, yeah, there we go. There's the article. Watertown Daily Times. And as I said, apparently originally published in the New York Times, so I don't know. You can look at that article as well. Again, you may have to check back later because I may not get all of these references put into the video description or whatever before the show ends, because I'm probably going to be ending it here before much longer. It's been 2 hours now, and I've got one article left. This one does come from the New York Times. Oh, and I think it may be the exact same article. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Okay. So this is the exact same article, but it's the original version of the article by Patricia Cohen, published on February the 16th. And the title of it is called, "In Amazon Fight, Progressives Showed What They Want, A New Economic Agenda." I'm going to go ahead and look at a little bit more of this and see what, if she says anything of, if she happened to say anything of any actual interest here. Because I don't know. I really don't. Let's see. Many objections raised in New York by critics like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman congresswoman whose Queens district borders the neighborhood where Amazon was headed, align with economic critiques offered by Democratic presidential contenders. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, for example, have frequently railed against the outsized power of corporations and lopsided tax cuts and incentives that favor the wealthy. Ms. Warren called the state subsidies in the Amazon deal, quote, taxpayer bribes, end quote, while Mr. Sanders said, quote, this is what the rigged economy is all about, end quote. New York was offering nearly $3 billion in subsidies to Amazon, a company that last year effectively paid half the 21% federal corporate tax rate. Actually, they paid nothing. They paid nothing. They got a tax rebate. They got money back. They didn't pay anything. At the same time, presidential hopefuls have supported policies that bolster workers and the middle class, like an increased minimum wage and rules that ensure overtime pay as well as substantial public investment. Democrats on the left are also floating ambitious proposals like free college for all, a federal jobs guarantee, an industrial plan to retool the country's energy use, and higher taxes on the wealthy. All of those ideas actually have been being promoted by the Green Party for well over a decade. I mean, Jill Stein ran on free college tuition and forgiveness of student loan debts. The federal jobs guarantee is a part of the Green New Deal, which comes out of the Green Party before Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ever got her hands on it. An industrial plan to retool the country's energy use. That is the Green New Deal we're talking about. And higher taxes on the wealthy. Yes, not to pay for things. However, now there is, unfortunately, as one of my recent videos discussed, some rather misguided aspects of the economic justice and sustainability plank in the Green Party of the United States party platform, based on the American Monetary Institute's outrageous, unnecessary, and counterproductive schemes vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar and the Federal Reserve. But nevertheless, higher taxes on the wealthy are important, and I'm going to tell you why. Again, and if you really want to know more, go and check out my video on presentation on MMT to the Lavender Green Caucus, which I did a video a week ago, I guess. I don't know. Something like that. Anyway, there are 3 reasons for taxation at the federal level. The first reason is to ensure that the citizens will impute value to the currency because it is, as I said, a fiat currency. It's non-convertible. That means you can't take it down to the bank or down to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas or wherever and say, give me however much gold this is worth. That's not the way things work anymore. We're not on the gold standard. We haven't been since 1973, I believe. No, 71, 73, somewhere around then. Nixon took us out of the Bretton Woods Accord. We're not on the gold standard anymore. There is no physical commodity backing our money. And some of you are going to talk about petrodollar. Go watch the video that I just told you about. I explain what that is. It's not what you think it is. Let's see. So, this being a fiat currency, it has no inherent value. It has value because the government says, fiat, let it be. That's what the word means. It's a Latin word, fiat. It means let it be or let there be. It comes from the Latin translation of the Bible. In the original Hebrew, Yehi Aur means let there be light. Translated that into Latin as fiat lux, let there be light. So, fiat, let there be, let it be, let he, she, or it be. So, by its own magic words, so to speak, the government has given the dollar value. Now, there's a trick to that, and that is that nobody has to agree that the dollar has value. So the government decides, well, here's how we do that. And this is not a new thing either. This goes back thousands of years. The government decides you have to pay taxes. And we're only going to take payment of taxes in the form of this particular currency which we issue. Now, even when the currency was a minted gold coin, it wasn't the coin didn't have value because of the gold in it, which was often worth less than what the government said the coin was worth. It had value because the image of the emperor or whatever was stamped on it, and a certain value was stamped on it as well in the minting process. So that's how much it was worth. But you had to pay taxes in those coins. So suddenly you decided the coins were worth exactly what they said they were worth. The same thing applies to the dollar today. Even though the vast majority of dollars in existence today don't exist as physical objects. You know, this business about printing money, it only applied when we had the gold standard. But even if we were talking about actually physically printed banknotes, Federal Reserve notes, pieces of paper with ink on them, the vast majority of dollars don't exist in that form. They are simply keystrokes, ones and zeros, moving around between accounts in digital space. They don't actually have a physical existence at all. So, but how does the government ensure that you will impute value to the currency? It says, you have to pay me taxes. You can only pay taxes in the form of US dollars. If you don't pay taxes, I'm going to throw your ass in jail. Oh, well, suddenly we all agree that dollars have value because none of us want to go to jail, right? Okay, so we need dollars. Now, where do we get dollars? Well, the government spends them into existence. They buy resources and services with the dollars they spend into existence. When you start playing a game of Monopoly, right, as others have said before, after you fought over who gets the race car and who gets the top hat and whatever else, you know, you choose someone to be the banker. And the first thing that happens after that, at the beginning of gameplay, is the banker doles out a certain amount of Monopoly money to each player. Ta-da! Because until you actually have the money, you can't spend it yourself. Where does the money come from? It comes from the banker. Who's the banker in the scenario we're talking about? The analogy works out to be the Federal Reserve, which is a creature of the United States Congress. It acts only when Congress authorizes it to do so. It does have some leeway. And as I've explained before, and again, go Go check out the video. I'm not going to go into the whole shebang here. But anyway, yeah, you don't have money until the government creates it and spends it. That's just the operational reality of our monetary system. So, I mean, I know that this is maybe hard to swallow, but it is economic fact. We're talking about macroeconomics here. This is how the actual, this is how the monetary system works. I'm sorry, but it is. You know, if you're crestfallen and dejected all of a sudden because I've just revealed to you that your money is inherently worthless, hey, what did you think it was worth before? Oil? Come on, it ain't worth oil. We've had this fiat currency since 1913, and we certainly weren't as dependent on oil back then as we are now. Now, at the time, we still had the gold standard going on, too. But the thing about the gold standard is, well, again, go watch the video. A presentation on MMT for the Lavender Green Caucus. It's on my channel, just like the video before the last show that I did. So go watch that, please, and check it out. You'll hopefully learn a lot, and I've got references provided so you can learn even more. And no, this is not some weird conspiracy theory. This is not some new, quote, theory, end quote, in the sense of unsubstantiated speculation. This is all based on empirical observation by economists going back to the 1930s and experimentation by the Federal Reserve System going back to the 1930s. Some of it was reported by Abba Lerner decades and decades ago. Some of it was reported by Beardsley Rumel, the chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, back in 1946. Rumel himself said that there's no need for the federal government to tax in order to fund spending. Dun dun dun. There you go, presto. Now, for the past 30 or 40 years, neo-Chartalism, or modern monetary theory, MMT, has been being developed. It's not some new thing that just sprang up all of a sudden. It's not leftist, it's not right-wing, it's not centrist, it's not partisan, it doesn't take any particular side in terms of economic philosophy. There are capitalists who use it, there are socialists who use it, there are social democrats who use it. It's just an empirical thing. It's a tool. It's a way of looking at what is possible with our monetary system. It is an accounting based on empiricism of what the operational realities of our monetary system are, and it is a projection based on that accounting plugged into deductive logic, deductive arguments, to project what is possible with our monetary system. That's it. Right-wingers use it all the time to finance wars and warplanes and warships and military adventures and all kinds of nifty stuff, tax cuts for the wealthy. Yeah, so I mean, capitalists use it too. It is the way our monetary system works, period. End of discussion. There's no way to debate this and be honest if you have the least idea of what you're talking about. Anyway, so the article continues, the groundwork for these ideas was prepared in recent years by a network of liberal economists, thinkers, and activists at research organizations and universities interested in developing a set of policies to displace supply-side economics and trickle-down theory. Wrong. On several counts. Number one, recent years. No, it goes back 30 or 40 years, and even further, if you want to get to the observation and experimentation which eventually led to the formulation of modern monetary theory or neo-Chartalism in the past 30 years or 30 or 40 years by a network of liberal economists. Wrong again. In economic terms, liberal means right-wing. That may come as a surprise to some of you as well. In social terms, liberal means permissive in terms of an attitude towards change in society and or culture. But when it comes to economics, liberalism, classical liberalism, and neoliberalism are economic theories which talk about license for corporations basically to do as they will. And neoliberalism goes even further and says, well, let's just fucking prop them up and give them subsidies and tax cuts and tax incentives and, yeah. The economic aspects of classical liberalism taken to unsustainable extremes happened under Warren G. Harding, Calvin Coolidge, and Herbert Hoover in the 1920s, and that unsustainable extreme to which they took the economic aspects of classical liberalism was one of the main factors that led to the Great Depression. Now we have all these social safety nets and, you know, things like Glass-Steagall, which has been undone now, and other FDIC and assorted other sorts of things put in place to prevent another Great Depression from happening. But since January of 1981, when Ronald Reagan became president, all the way up to now, all of these things have been being gradually undone. Glass-Steagall, as I said, has been replaced by Dodd-Frank. I think they got rid of that now, or they're trying to at least. And it was watered down. It was severely watered down. It was nothing compared to Glass-Steagall. But even Dodd-Frank is too much for the fucking wealthy, greedy bankers. And on and on and on. Deregulate, deregulate, deregulate. What kind of fucking madness is this? It's going to trickle down. It's supply-side economics. No, it's not. It didn't work in the 1890s. It didn't work in the 1920s. It hasn't worked since 1981. We've been trying this shit for the past 40 years, and look at the economic situation of our country today. Well, unemployment is down. I talked about that last week. Go watch my show from last week. Go watch it. Seriously. Unemployment is down because people are working part-time jobs involuntarily. Because there aren't full-time jobs available. I've already talked about that tonight too. Anyway. So this article continues a bit longer, and I mean, this is the same article that I was reading a while ago. I don't know if it looks like it's identical in every way, but I didn't. And then we get people, let's see, talking about, oh, let's have venture capitalists who are now progressive activists and writers. Yee! It should be replaced with what he and Eric Liu, a former advisor in Bill Clinton's administration, call middle-out economics. And he says, this is Nick Hanauer, quote, I believe capitalism is the greatest social technology ever created for generating wealth and prosperity, but we've confused what's good for the narrow short-term interest of a few capitalists for what's good for capitalism, end quote. No, I mean, Clinton's the guy who took the Democratic Party into neoliberalism. Capitalism is not the greatest social technology ever created for generating wealth and prosperity. I'm sorry, but it's not. Imperialism under Rome was pretty fucking effective. And I'm not advocating that either. But look, we had thousands of years of innovation before empires rose in Europe. We had thousands of years of innovation and prosperity before feudalism, with cooperative economies. Thousands of years of successful cooperative economy. And people keep saying, well, socialism's never worked. What the fuck do you think a cooperative is? The basic ideal of socialism is that the means of production should be owned and controlled by the producers. What is a cooperative? Hey, it's a business that is owned and controlled by the people who work at the business. Duh! Yes, motherfuckers, socialism did work for thousands of years. And then some asshole decided, hey, I want to get richer than everybody else. Everybody else. I want to fucking exploit everybody I can and everything I can and hoard as much fucking money as I can. You know, in tribal societies, it wasn't the hoarding of wealth that brought social status. It was the dispensing of wealth among one's clients that brought social status. In fact, in Brehon law in early medieval Ireland, that was enshrined into the law. That the Ri, which would be translated as king, but you know, the original meaning of the term was leader of warriors, not monarch. The Ri was required by law to disperse some of his wealth among the people of his Tuath tribe, if you will. Anyway, this article goes on for, I don't know, another couple of pages or so. I will include a link to both this version at the New York Times and the version from Watertown Daily News or whatever. Daily Times, sorry. And you can compare and contrast them to see if there's any difference. I think there are some different, you know, photographs or the like. So, you know, you can have a look at those if you like. Now, again, I'm probably not gonna get these into the video description tonight. And I may wind up having to put them into a blog post, because there is a character limit on YouTube's video descriptions. I have taken my boyfriend's advice. He will be happy to note, and replaced some of my verbosity, I think some people would call it, with abbreviated notes in the video description, exactly as he suggested, in fact. So I hope he will appreciate that. But let me see here. Yes, here we are. I'm going to jump to this and get this. Yeah, that's exactly what the deal is. Okay, so it's exactly the same. I think it's exactly the same in every way, both of these articles. But, you know, I'm not going to sit down myself and compare them line by line. So, you know, I mean, if you want to do that, like I said, there may be some different imagery and so forth in them. But by all means, check them out yourselves if you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to look into the external sidebar text chat and see if anyone out there is talking or has any observations or feedback or commentary. I see there's still one person watching. Thank you very much, whoever you are, for putting up with my rambling and ranting. So, I mean, you've been awfully quiet, I guess. Do you have any kind of feedback, any questions, any comments that you would care to offer? I know it takes a few moments. There's a little bit of lag between me saying anything here and you hearing it out there. So, you know, I'll wait a brief period of time, see if you actually have. Oh, this has happened once or twice before. When I would do a video show and ask if the one or two people out there watching have anything they'd like to ask or say or whatever, and there's no reply. So I don't know if someone is actually watching or just has the video open in an attempt to give me views. But you know, thanks for that too, if that be the case. But yeah, let me see here. And I don't see anything still, so I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and assume that if you be actually there, you may be listening via your phone or something and unable to type as you drive or whatever. So, I mean, thanks for the view, at least, and I hope that you have found the show at least moderately informative, and that my my rambling and ranting weren't too annoying. I'm going to go ahead and restore the music that I played earlier, and play us out. Again, I do have a Discord. Link is in the video description. You like what I do, I've got a Patreon. Please consider becoming my patron. The references for the links to the articles, and maybe a few other things that I didn't actually cover that are related, will be included eventually. Maybe later tonight in the video description itself, or maybe not until tomorrow in a blog post, and then the link to the post will be in the video description. So check back tomorrow probably, and you should be able to find the links. So I'm going to go ahead and say, until next time, have fun but stay safe. For Republic News, this is Liviana signing off.